Hi, I'm Bruce Feiler. I'm pleased to be making my fourth visit to the National Book Festival. I have such warm memories of being in the White House at an event hosted by Laura Bush, the Library of Congress, and of course, our National Mall. I'm coming to you today from my home in Brooklyn. This is what we call our Orange Room. It's not as august as the White House, but that's a painting from my mom over this shoulder in Georgia. And that's a painting I bought as a gift for my wife in Kenya a few years ago. This is my favorite room in our home, and it's also the one that I would sit in late at night when the pandemic first hit, listening to the sirens go by and wondering, as so many of us have been wondering, am I going to get through this? Like, am I going to be okay? As it happens, I spent the last 5 years talking to people about how they get through moments just like this, moments that I call lifequakes. A lifequake is a massive change in our lives that has aftershocks that last for years. And I got interested in this period because I went through a lifequake a few years ago. I just got walloped by life. I got cancer as a new dad. I almost went bankrupt. My dad, who has Parkinson's, tried to take his own life. And I went looking for a book that could help me get through a moment like this when life seems to be coming at you from so many directions. But I couldn't find one. And I thought there must be some wisdom out there. And so I set out on this journey, crisscrossing the country, collecting what came to be hundreds of life stories of Americans of all ages, all walks of life, all 50 states. People who lost limbs, lost homes, changed careers, changed religions, got sober, got out of bad marriages. In the end, I had 1,000 hours of interviews, 6,000 pages of transcripts. And I then spent a year combing through these, trying to identify themes and takeaways that could help all of us survive and thrive in times of change. And here's what I learned. The linear life is dead. The idea that many of us were told growing up that we could expect to have one job, one home, one relationship, one source of happiness from adolescence to assisted living, that's gone. And it's been replaced by what I call the nonlinear life. It has many more twists and turns and transitions. And I have been working on this book for half a decade, and it arrives, lo and behold, at this moment when the entire planet is going through a life transition. And the timing seems almost eerie, and as I've been hearing from readers across the country, these themes seem almost viscerally connected to their everyday struggles. But here's what I also learned. The transitions are a skill that we can and must master. My book, Life is in the Transitions, unveils the first new model for how to navigate life transitions in 50 years. And I'm so honored to be at our country's signature literary event to tell some stories and talk about some of what I learned to help you or someone you love get through this moment that is scary, but also can be a meaningful time in each of our lives. So let's talk a little bit about the moment that we're in today, this lifequake that we're all experiencing. One thing I found in talking to the people that I spoke to all across this country is that our lives take a different shape than we expect. I mean, this idea of life shape is not something that I was particularly familiar with. One of the most exciting parts of this project was kind of pulling a book off a shelf one day and feeling like the entire bookcase opened and I was in a different room. And what I found in that room was this idea that each culture has a sort of paradigmatic life shape. So in the ancient world, they thought life was a cycle. To every season, turn, turn, turn. In the Middle Ages, they thought life was a staircase up to middle age and then a staircase down. And since the birth of science in the late 19th century, we were told to expect that life would be a linear arrow of progress, right? Freud says everything has stages. Erickson said the 8 stages of development. We have the 5 stages of grief, the hero's journey. These are all linear constructs of life. And this reaches its peak in the 70s when Gail Sheehy publishes Passages, which popularizes the idea that everyone does the same thing in their 20s and their 30s, and then everyone has a midlife crisis between 39 and 45. Well, it turns out that this idea isn't really relevant to the lives we live today. And the pandemic is a perfect example of that, because if you are between 39 and 45, you're having this pandemic in your midlife. But if you're 27, you're also having a crisis, or if you're 67, you're having a crisis. And what I found in kind of teasing out themes from these hundreds of life stories is that the basic unit of change in our lives is what I call a disruptor. Okay. It turns out we go through 3 dozen of these disruptors in the course of our lives. That's one every 12 to 18 months. That's more frequently than most people see a dentist. And this could be as small as having an accident or starting a new position at work. It could be huge, like having children or losing your job. Most of these we actually get through relatively easy. We're pretty good at adapting to small changes in our lives. But 1 in 10 of these becomes a huge, massive life change. That's what I call a lifequake. And what I did was I then looked at these lifequakes and tried to understand them more. And it turns out that 47% of them are voluntary. Like we choose to make the change because we do have a lot more freedom now than we used to have. 53% of these are involuntary. Okay. So a voluntary lifequake is we start a new job, we move. An involuntary lifequake is our spouse cheats on us, or we get a diagnosis, or we have an accident. So it turns out that that's one metric, voluntary, involuntary. And the other metric I looked at is personal versus collective. So a personal lifequake is one that affects you or your family. A collective lifequake is a natural disaster, a recession, or a 9/11 was very popular in my study. The smallest category was collective involuntary lifequake. And what the pandemic is this massive collective involuntary lifequake that we're all experiencing at the same time. And one of the kind of curiosities that I discovered was these lifequakes don't happen in isolation. They tend to clump, right? So just when you're starting a new job, your wife gets diagnosed with a disease. Just when you're going to move, your mother-in-law has a cataract surgery and your son is found to have an anxiety disorder. So I call this phenomenon a pileup because it's like the old black and white cars where the first one and then boom, 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 boom. I think that one of the things that's interesting about this particular moment in time is that the pandemic is a collective involuntary lifequake, but Black Lives Matter and the reckoning about centuries of racial disparities and injustice, that's a collective voluntary lifequake. And I think the two are connected in a way that we're not actually really talking about. But here's the thing that's important to recognize. The fact that we are going through this together is actually somewhat deceptive because the lifequake can be voluntary or involuntary, but the life transition that comes out of it must be voluntary. You have to choose to go through the steps and the process in order to change your life. And what's deceptive about it is that each of us is going to choose a different transition. Some of us may choose to get sober and face an addiction. Some of us may want to change jobs or be forced to change jobs. Some of us may want to move or rethink our relationships. So the experience that we're going through is collective, but the way it's going to affect each of us is going to be individual to our own lives. When I first started this project, I had an expectation that different people would handle transitions in a different way. That people from different cultures would handle transitions in a different way, that people of different genders may handle transitions in a different way. I also believe that how people handled a medical transition, from a work transition, from a spiritual transition would be different. It turns out I was flat wrong. And this was the biggest single change that I went through while working on this book. That it turns out that no matter who you are and what kind of transition that you're going through, that the toolkit and the process of going through it turns out to be stunningly similar. So what happens is when you go through a transition, you usually feel one of two things. You either feel chaotic and out of control, like you have a 50-point to-do list and you have to hurriedly get through them all. Or you feel sluggish and like you can't move and you're in a fetal position on your bed and you're stuck in place. You think that you're the only one going through it and that you're not going to get through it. But look at enough of them as I did. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year, talking to 2-time cancer survivors who climbed Mount Everest, people who lost limbs in war, people who got out of bad marriages, people who left cults, people who overcame fire and tornadoes. And certain patterns began to appear. So it turns out that life transitions have 3 phases. I call them the long goodbye, where you say goodbye to the life that's not coming back. The messy middle, where you shed certain habits and begin to create new ones. And the new beginning, where you unveil your new self. So it turns out for the first century that people talked about life transitions, we were told you had to go through these phases in order. First you had to say goodbye, and then you had the messy middle, and then you went to the new beginning. Turns out that that's not true at all. Is that Each of us has one of these phases that we're good at. I call it your transition superpower, and one that you're bad at, your transition kryptonite. So, for example, let's talk about the long goodbye. 40% of people are not good at this. They stick around too long. Maybe they're people pleasers. They don't like conflict. But some people are good at them. I talked to Nina Collins, a woman who lost her mom when she was 19 and had to raise her younger brother. She's gone on to have 3 marriages and even more jobs. And she said, I'm good at saying goodbye. My psychologist, my therapist says that I under-attach to things. The messy middle is the hardest phase for most people because it's long, it's difficult, it's arduous. But I talked to a guy named Rob Adams, who is a management consultant. He was hired to take over the Simon Pierce Glass Company in Vermont. He started a month after the Great Recession. Sales dropped by a quarter in the first month. And so he probably should have left. It was a family business. But he said, I liked being a leader. I liked being a mentor. I liked my colleagues. A year later, when he finally was pushed out, he said, then I got the messy middle. Like, I was good at that. Like, it took me too long to say goodbye, but I made a list and I'm a consultant and I talked to a lot of people. And he moved his family to Africa in order to start and run a nonprofit. And then I talked to a woman named Lisa Ludovici. You would think that the new beginning, that everybody would welcome this phase. She grew up in a broken family. She went to college. Her mother didn't even attend her graduation. She was homeless. She went to work as an internet ad executive for AOL. And she had 3 migraines a week from age 3 to age 43. And she logged onto a conference call one day. Her colleagues didn't know she was there. She overheard them saying that she was sour. She walked home, looked through her Amex bills, quit the next day, cut cable, stopped going out to eat, didn't go shopping. She was watching local access television and she saw someone being a life coach. And she said, that's what I want to do. I want to help people. She enrolled in life coach school. On day 1, the teacher came. Her head was down. Teacher said, what's wrong? She said, well, I've had 3 migraines. Don't worry. I'm used to it. Teacher said, come with me. Put her in a chair, hypnotized her. Lisa hasn't had a migraine since. And today she's the country's leading medical hypnotist. This was an incredible change. She was afraid to tell people about it because her friends would think it was weird. She wrote and rewrote her LinkedIn profile for 6 months. Finally, when she pressed send, it published and she felt relief. So for her, the new beginning was hard. So one of the things I try to do in this book is walk you through the process of identifying which phase you're good at and which you're bad at, so you can start at the phase you're good at, build some confidence, and then go into the part that will be harder. I didn't go into this project thinking that I wanted to write about transitions. But what happened is I sat across from people for so long was it was clear that transitions were a central part of being alive, but it's actually not a process that we've talked a lot about. It's sort of a little bit been out of favor because we all believed that technology and medicine was going to make our lives better all the time. But one of the things that I found is that we have 3 to 5 lifequakes in the course of our lives, and that the average length of time is 5 years. So when you think 3, 4, 5 times in our lives, 4, 5, 6 years, that's 25 years. That's half of our adult lives that we're talking about being in transition. You or someone you know is going through them right now. But then how do people actually do it successfully? It turns out that I identified what I call these 7 tools for how to navigate transitions. Many of us do some of them well, naturally, but nobody does all of them, and everybody wanted to get better. So one of the most piercing questions that I asked is I looked 225 people in the eye and I said, what's the biggest emotion that you struggled with in your time of change? The number 1 answer, fear. People were afraid of the unknown. Am I taking too much risk? Am I going to get through it? Will I be able to pay my bills? I talked to a guy, Brian Wecht, who was a theoretical physicist, Harvard and MIT trained. He also had a side hustle. He was in a YouTube comedy band called Ninja Sex Party. And he said he wanted to leave his job. He called his advisor, and his advisor said, you can't leave your tenured professorship. You're the only one of my students who ever got a job. But he wanted to do this. And he said the fear of staying was greater than the fear of leaving. So fear was the number 1 answer. The number 2 answer was sadness. People grieved. They liked the old life. They liked the loved one. They liked the job that they used to have or the home that they had. And the third answer, I have to say, surprised me. It was shame. People were ashamed to have lost their job or given up their status. They're ashamed that their child has an addiction. They feel ashamed. And when they see people, they run away from them. So the first tool that I identified is that you have to accept this. But the second turned out to be one of the more surprising ones for me, which is how do people deal with those emotions? The answer is some people write them down. Some people do what I would do, which is put their head down and like, I'm going to work my way through it. But 80%, 80, use rituals of some kind. They held a memorial service. They threw a party. They waved a flag. They buried something in the backyard. They got a tattoo. I talked to a woman, Lisa Ray Rosenberg, had an incredibly difficult year in Southern California. She was a bone marrow donor to her brother. She had a big fight and a falling out with her mother. She went on 52 first dates. She actually made a spreadsheet with what she wore on the first date because she only went through 7 second dates and she wanted to make sure she didn't wear the same clothes. And she said this was incredibly difficult. Her biggest fear was heights, and so she jumped out of an airplane. So these rituals are, a year later she was married, I should say, and had a child. What these rituals are is public gestures, ways to say to yourself and to those around you, I'm going through a transition. I'm going to say goodbye to that old life. And I would say the number one thing I've heard in the pandemic is people, for the first few months, believed that we were going to go back. We're not going to go back. Okay, we're going to go forward or sideways or a different direction or entirely. And part of what we need to do at this particular moment in time is ritualize the saying goodbye that will open us up for the process of change that's to come next. I love that the theme of this year's National Book Festival is ingenuity. And I felt like I didn't really understand that word. And I was looking through the origin. And it turns out that this word comes from the word ingenious. It means that we create something, that we invent something. That, of course, is what our country did. But I think that there's a lesson in our country's story for each of our individual stories, which is that we might like to think that we created this great country, our founders did generations ago, and we can just live in it. But what we've learned is that every generation, we have to recreate, keep revisiting and renewing the idea of this country. And that's what happens to each of us individually. The great scriptural traditions all have a common element that individuals and people go into the desert. They go through the wilderness. They go into the forest and into the darkness. And more, at certain periods, we have to do that in our own lives, go back through a difficult period. And one of the most powerful things I learned about life transitions is that that's what we do. There is this period where we have to shed our former self and habits and mindsets and expectations. But then in the middle of this, people turn to astonishing acts of creativity. They sing, they dance. I talked to a woman in Alabama who had stomach cancer and stepped down from her job teaching college chemistry. She fulfilled a childhood dream of being a ballerina. She took adult ballet. I talked to an army sergeant named Zach Herrick who had his face blown off by the Taliban. 31 surgeries between the tip of his nose and the tip of his chin, including having his tongue sewn back on. He was on the brink of suicide multiple times. What saved him? Learning to cook, learning to write poetry, and learning to paint. He said, I used to splatter the enemy with bullets. Now I splatter the canvas with paint. These are acts of creativity that we need to create ourselves anew. And that is what this moment, the pandemic, is this pause that we all are going through, and we need to rethink and revisit our own lives and use ingenuity to create ourselves anew. But at its heart, the entire process of going through a life transition is, in a sense, what we've gathered here at this festival to talk about. It's to think about our lives as a story and to revisit and revise and update our life story. But there is no story without conflict. What happens in life is that the conflict is the breach in the normal, and the role of the story is to resolve that breach. The Italians have a wonderful expression about this: lupus in fabula. The fabula is the fairy tale of our lives when everything is going right. The lupus is the wolf, the big scary thing that shows up and makes everything around it dangerous. Lupus in fabula means the wolf in the fairy tale. Just when life is going along swimmingly, along comes a wolf, a dragon, an ogre, a downsizing, a death, a tornado, a pandemic. And we might like to banish these wolves from our lives, but we can't banish them. And that's okay, because if we banish the wolf, we banish the hero. And if there's one thing I've learned is that we all have to be the hero of our own story. So this experience for me of talking to these people has been like a giant tool factory. It's given me the tools so that whatever wolf shows up, I can fight them back. What I want to say to people is whatever you're struggling with, whatever kept you awake last night, or you sat with your coffee this morning looking out the window and wondering, whatever you're going through, I've been there and I've met lots of people just like you. And I talked to these people and they gave me not just hope, but actual practical things I can do to get through a difficult time. So what I want to say to you is whatever you're struggling with, come on this journey with me, meet these people. You're going to find in this book things you can do tonight, this weekend, tomorrow, next week, 3 months from now, so that whatever you're struggling with, whatever life transition you're in, you can get through it a little bit better and a lot more effectively. There is knowledge out there. We can defeat the wolves together.